Have you ever watched someone get humiliated, quietly, deliberately, in front of a room full of people, and done absolutely nothing about it? I have, and I'm not proud of it. But what happened next? That part still gives me chills. This is a story about a woman named Zola Ferreira Baptiste, 43 years old, Afro-Caribbean Canadian, building custodian at Ashford and Gale LLP, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in downtown Toronto. She was the kind of woman you walked past every morning without really seeing. Medium height, sturdy build, natural hair pulled back under a cap, gray uniform 2 sizes too big because the firm ordered one standard size for all custodial staff. She carried a mop bucket on wheels that squeaked slightly on the marble floor. She'd been with the firm for 11 years. Most of the lawyers didn't know her name. The ones who did called her the cleaning lady. Her supervisor, a man named Patrick Galvao Rice, was 31 years old, white, born in London, and imported to Toronto specifically to modernize building operations at Ashford and Gale. He had an MBA and a collection of loud pocket squares and an absolute certainty that he understood how things worked. He had never mopped a floor in his life. He had been Zola's supervisor for 8 months. That was all it took for everything to fall apart, and then come together in a way nobody in that building saw coming. It started on a Tuesday in March. Ashford and Gale had landed what the partners called the deal of the decade. A Japanese technology conglomerate called Maruyama Holdings, 70 billion in assets, expansion into North American infrastructure, was looking for a Canadian legal partner to manage its cross-border acquisitions. The negotiation had been in the works for 6 months. Flying in from Tokyo was Maruyama Holdings' Senior Vice President of International Development, a man named Kenji Maruyama, grandson of the company's founder, fluent in English, but famously preferring his native language in formal settings. A professional interpreter had been contracted. Everything was in place. Zola knew all of this because she cleaned the boardroom on the 14th floor every morning at 6. She read the whiteboards before she erased them. She saw the printed agendas left on tables. She was invisible, and invisibility, she had learned long ago, was its own kind of power. That Tuesday, Patrick Galvao Rice called all custodial staff to the lobby at 7:30 for what he called a professional standards briefing. The Maruyama delegation arrives Thursday, he said, clipboard in hand, not looking up. That means this building needs to be immaculate. I need everyone operating at a level that is consistent with the reputation of this firm. Then he looked up, directly at Zola. Ferreira. He never used her full name, just the second half, like even saying both halves would cost him something. I need you off the 14th floor Thursday morning. I'll have Singh cover it. Zola blinked. Singh is part-time. He doesn't know the 14th floor layout dabla. Then I'll show him. The boardroom has a specific setup. The ventilation panel by the north window sticks. The Ferreira. Patrick's voice dropped, the way men's voices do when they want to remind you that they can make it drop. I don't need a consultation. I need you on floors 9 through 11 Thursday. That's it. The other custodial staff looked at their shoes. Zola looked at Patrick. Her face did not change. It almost never did. Understood, she said, and that was that. Or so Patrick thought. What Patrick Galvao Rice did not know, what almost no one at Ashford and Gale knew, was that Zola Ferreira Baptiste had not always been a custodian. She had spent 12 years in Osaka. Her late husband, Daisuke Ferreira Baptiste, had been a translator and cultural liaison for a Canadian trade commission. They had met in Montreal when Zola was 22, both of them studying at Concordia. She was finishing a double major in East Asian Studies and Linguistics. They had married young, moved to Japan together, and spent over a decade building a life there. Daisuke handled the official translation work. Zola raised their daughter, Naomi, in a small apartment in the Tennoji ward, took language immersion classes, taught English at a local school, and became quietly and without anyone keeping score, fluent. Not conversational fluent, not tourist fluent. Fluent the way you get when you dream in a language, when you argue in it, when you grieve in it. Daisuke died of a sudden cardiac event in 2017. Zola was 36. Naomi was 9. They came back to Toronto with 3 suitcases and a debt load that Zola spent 2 years paying down. She took the first stable job with benefits she could find. Ashford and Gale was hiring custodial staff. The pay was decent. The hours let her be home when Naomi got out of school. She did not list her language skills on the application. She had learned, in the years since Daisuke died, that some things were safer to keep close, that people responded to what they expected to see, that a black woman with a mop was not expected to be someone who had translated legal briefs, informally but accurately, for trade commissioners in Western Japan. She kept her Japanese to herself. She spoke it only on the phone with Naomi, sometimes, late at night, when they were both feeling the particular longing that belongs to people who have loved a place they can't go back to. She had not spoken it publicly in 7 years. Thursday arrived with the particular tension of a building that knows something important is happening. The 14th floor was polished and gleaming by 7 a.m., courtesy of Harjit Singh, who was doing his best and did not know about the ventilation panel by the north window. The panel would stick and blow cold air directly onto the south side of the conference table. Nobody knew this yet. The Maruyama delegation arrived at 9:15. Kenji Maruyama was 64 years old, compact and precise, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need to. He wore a dark navy suit and carried nothing but a slim leather folio. His assistant, a young woman named Fumiko Arai, walked 2 steps behind him carrying everything else. The lead partner at Ashford and Gale was a man named Clifford Wentworth Hale, 62, who had the handshake and the haircut and the voice of someone who had been the most important person in every room for 40 years. He greeted Kenji Maruyama warmly, gestured expansively at the boardroom, and introduced the interpreter, a man named Graham Osinyarko, who had flown in from Vancouver. Graham Osinyarko had caught a severe gastrointestinal illness on the flight. He made it off the elevator and directly to the 14th floor bathroom where he remained. For 22 minutes, the partners waited. Fumiko Arai checked her phone. Kenji Maruyama sat perfectly still and said nothing in any language. The ventilation panel by the north window blew cold air onto the south side of the conference table where 2 junior associates were sitting, and they shivered and pretended they weren't. Clifford Wentworth Hale stepped into the hallway and called Patrick Galvao Rice. Patrick called the interpreter agency. The interpreter agency's backup was in Ottawa, 3 hours away. "We can reschedule," one of the junior partners murmured. "We cannot reschedule," Clifford said, in the voice of a man who understood exactly what was at stake. Maruyama Holdings had 3 other firms in consideration. A rescheduled meeting was a signal. A signal was a withdrawal. A withdrawal was the end of it. Patrick was pacing the hallway. His pocket square, yellow today, was visible above his breast pocket like a small, useless flag. Zola was on the 9th floor, running a floor polisher along the corridor outside a row of associates' offices when her radio crackled. It was Harjit Singh. "Zola, you know anybody who speaks Japanese?" She paused the floor polisher. "Why?" "Because there's about 20 lawyers on 14 losing their minds and their interpreter is sick in the bathroom." Zola stood still for a moment. She thought about Daisuke, about Osaka, about a specific evening. Naomi was 4. She'd been sick with a fever. When Zola had sat up all night reading to her in Japanese, because it was the only thing that calmed her down. She thought about the last time she'd spoken it out loud to anyone other than Naomi. She thought about Patrick's voice dropping when he told her to stay off the 14th floor. She thought, "I am going to regret one of 2 things. Either I go up there and something goes wrong, or I don't go up there and something goes wrong anyway." She turned off the floor polisher. She took the service elevator to 14. She came in through the door at the far end of the boardroom, the one that custodial staff used. She was still in her gray uniform. She had her mop cart with her because she hadn't thought to leave it. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the room. 23 people looking at her. Kenji Maruyama, Fumiko Arai. Clifford Wentworth Hale and his 4 senior partners, 6 junior associates, 3 staff who had wandered in and didn't know how to wander back out, Patrick Galvao Rice, who had appeared from somewhere in the hallway and was now standing near the window, with an expression that said he would like very much to be somewhere else. Zola looked at the mop cart. She stepped away from it, leaving it in the doorway. She walked into the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, in English, to the room in general. Then she turned to Kenji Maruyama, and she said, in Japanese, careful, clean, the formal register that she had learned from a textbook and then refined over 12 years of actual living. "Maruyama-san, I apologize for the disruption to your schedule. My name is Zola. I understand that your interpreter is unwell. If it would be acceptable to you and to your team, I can assist." The room went very, very quiet. Kenji Maruyama looked at her. His expression did not change. He looked at her the way experienced people look at unexpected things, not with surprise, but with assessment. He looked at the uniform. He looked at her hands, still slightly reddened from the cleaning solution she'd been using on 9. He looked at her face. Then he said in Japanese, "Your accent is Kansai influenced. Did you live in Osaka?" "For 12 years, Zola said. "My husband was from there." A pause. Then something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it crossed Kenji Maruyama's face. He turned to Clifford Wentworth Hale and said, in English, for the benefit of the room, "I would be very comfortable proceeding with this arrangement." Patrick Galvao Rice made a sound that was not quite a word. Clifford Wentworth Hale looked at Zola for a long moment. Then he looked at Patrick. Then he said, "Please." He gestured at the chair to his right. "Sit down." She sat. And then she worked. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, Zola Ferreira Baptiste sat at the most expensive conference table she had ever been near and translated, not just words, but intent, nuance, the difference between a formal refusal and a polite deferral. The specific phrase that Kenji Maruyama used when he was expressing genuine interest versus the phrase he used when he was being diplomatic. She had spent 12 years listening to the way Japanese businessmen talked when they were in the room with Westerners and when they weren't. She knew the difference. At one point, Clifford Wentworth Hale proposed a clause that, translated literally, would have come across as a demand rather than a request. Zola paused. She looked at Clifford. She said, in English, quietly enough that it was just for him, "I'd suggest reframing that. In the direct form, it may read as presumptuous." Clifford looked at her. "How would you put it?" she told him. He nodded once. He rephrased. Kenji Maruyama's expression across the table relaxed by half a degree. Fumiko Arai wrote something in her folio. The deal did not fall apart. At 12:53 p.m., Kenji Maruyama and Clifford Wentworth Hale shook hands across the table. The junior associates, who had been sitting rigid for 3 hours, let out a collective breath that moved through the room like a small, relieved wind. Clifford Wentworth Hale said, in English, to Zola, "Thank you. That was extraordinary." Before Zola could respond, Kenji Maruyama spoke, in Japanese, and Zola translated simultaneously, quietly, for Clifford's benefit. He says, "The best translators are not those who only know the words. They are the ones who understand the people behind the words." A pause. Then Maruyama looked directly at Clifford and said, in English, and everyone in the room heard it clearly, "You should know the people who work for you." Patrick Galvao Rice did not say anything for the rest of that meeting. He had been in the room the whole time, standing near the wall, which was where people stood when they did not have a chair. He had watched Zola sit at that table for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He had watched the most important client his firm had ever entertained lean forward when she spoke. He had watched Clifford Wentworth Hale defer to a woman in a custodial uniform on matters of language and nuance. When the Maruyama delegation was being walked to the elevator by 3 senior partners, Patrick crossed the boardroom towards Zola. She was standing near the door, holding her mop cart handle, ready to go back to 9. "Ferreira," he said. She looked at him. "Why didn't you tell anyone about the Japanese?" Zola looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Nobody asked." She pushed the mop cart through the door and let it close behind her. What happened after that took about a week to unfold, and I want to tell you exactly how it happened, because it did not happen the way these stories usually go in movies. Nobody fired Patrick immediately. Nobody burst into applause. The managing partners held 3 separate meetings, one on Friday, one on Monday, and one on the following Thursday. And they reviewed the building services contracts, the staff records, and the documentation from the Maruyama negotiation, which Clifford Wentworth Hale had logged in detail because he was the kind of man who documented everything. What they found in Zola Ferreira Baptiste's HR file: 11 years of service, 0 disciplinary incidents, 2 commendations from the building's facilities director, and a skills section that listed only general building maintenance, floor care, biohazard handling, inventory management. No mention of East Asian studies, no mention of linguistics, no mention of 12 years in Osaka. One of the senior partners, a woman named Adrienne Chudhuri Osi, who oversaw internal operations, called Zola into her office on the following Wednesday. It was the first time in 11 years that Zola had sat across a desk from someone at that level of the firm. The office was on the 20th floor. The view was the lake. Adrienne Chudhuri Osi was 57, South Asian Canadian, with the posture of someone who had fought for every inch of ground she stood on and had stopped apologizing for it. She looked at Zola across the desk and said, "I've been doing some reading." "All right," Zola said. "You have a degree from Concordia. 2, technically." A pause. "And you've been mopping floors here for 11 years. Zola looked at the lake. It was gray and enormous and indifferent. "The hours work for my daughter," she said. "Benefits kicked in after 90 days. Stability matters." Adrienne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maruyama Holdings has confirmed. We're moving forward. They've asked, specifically, that you be listed as a cultural liaison on the file." Zola looked at her. "Kenji Maruyama's office sent a letter," Adrienne said. "His assistant wrote it, in Japanese. It was addressed to the firm's managing partners, and it specifically referenced the custodial staff member who, and I'm paraphrasing the translation here, demonstrated both linguistic precision and the kind of human understanding that reflects the true character of an organization." The lake was very gray and very large. "Okay," Zola said. "We'd like to offer you a formal role," Adrienne said. "International Liaison Coordinator. It would involve working on the Maruyama file and potentially others. The compensation would be—" She slid a paper across the desk. Zola looked at it. "I still want the health benefits," Zola said. Adrienne almost smiled. "That's included, and I want it in the contract that my daughter can use the firm's legal resource library for her law school applications." "Naomi's applying to law school?" "She's 17. She wants to do international trade law." A pause. "She gets it from her father. We can put that in." Zola nodded. Patrick Galvin-Reis was not fired. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. He was reassigned. Building Services Operations was restructured and placed under a new internal director, someone from within the firm who actually knew the staff. Patrick was moved to a facilities coordination role at one of the firm's satellite offices in Mississauga. He kept his salary. He kept his pocket squares. But he lost the 14th floor. He lost the account. He lost the Maruyama file. And he lost the quiet authority that comes from being the one who decides where people go and who matters. Whether he learned anything from that, I don't know. Some people do. Some don't. What I do know is that on her first day in the new role, Zola Ferreira Baptiste came into the office on the 14th floor, the same boardroom she'd cleaned for 11 years, wearing a charcoal blazer that Naomi had picked out for her the weekend before. She sat in a chair at the conference table. The same table. She had a coffee. She had a notepad. She had a meeting with 2 associates and a junior partner who were preparing for the first round of Maruyama negotiations. She looked out at the window. The lake was there, still gray, still enormous. She thought about Daisuke, about Osaka, about a 4-year-old with a fever listening to bedtime stories in Japanese in a small apartment in the Tennoji ward. She thought, "You carried all of that for a reason." Then she opened her notepad and got to work. Before I let you go, and I want you to think about this, really think about it. Consider every person in your workplace whose name you don't know. Every person you pass without saying hello. Every person you assume you've already figured out because of the uniform they wear, or the floor they're on, or the task they're doing when you walk by. Zola Ferreira Baptiste was in that building for 11 years. 11 years of marble floors and squeaky mop buckets and a supervisor who called her by half her name. 11 years of being walked past, looked through, assigned to different floors when something important was happening. And she never complained. She never announced herself. She just kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept carrying everything she was. Until the day the room needed exactly what she had. That's the part that gets me. Not the big dramatic moment in the boardroom. Not the letter from Kenji Maruyama. The 11 years before that. The quiet dignity of it. The patience. You don't have to be dramatic to be powerful. You don't have to announce what you're worth. Sometimes you just have to wait for the room to finally ask the right question. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me about a time you were underestimated, or a time you underestimated someone else and got it completely wrong. I want to read every single one. Like this video, if you think Zola deserved every bit of what came to her, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe to DELL Stories, because every week we find the people the world overlooked, and we make sure their stories get told. I'll see you in the next one.